Hey everybody, my name is Quinn, or Quinn the GM. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for bearing with me last week. It was a bit of a transitional period, but I'm back in person here, not just pictures on a screen, though I guess this is just a picture on your screen. This week we're going to talk about a case study in the idea of creating sandboxes in TTRPG worlds, and that particular case study is Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. It's a great book that I love more and more the more I read it, and I think it does a lot of things really well and has a really great variety of its ideas. But this week, we go into specifically the first chapter, which presents 10 towns as this sandbox in which players can explore very early on in their adventure. So, before we jump into things, be sure to like the video if you enjoy it, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. I would love to be able to do this more often, and if you enjoy it, I'd love to hear from you. And subscribing, liking, and is free and all that, and I really hope that you do so, because I really appreciate it. On the topic at hand. The introduction to the Rime of the Frostmaiden is quite unique when compared to other 5th edition officially published modules. Particularly, you essentially have a lot of options as a DM to give your players. You have 12 of them specifically, either that you can pick from, knowing your group and seeing what they might like best, or you could give the players to pick from in-universe, maybe just a selection of them, or maybe they get access to all of them. These are essentially 2 tailor-made starting quests, which are 2 of these options that are made to kind of enforce the themes of this game early on and kind of tie into several looming, lingering threads throughout the campaign. Or there are 10 location-based quests. Icewind Dale is home to the famous 10 towns, and each of these locales has a starting quest that essentially doubles down on whatever flavor this town has and really helps flesh out the location as a whole. Having all of these quests so close together and so kind of interlocked in their kind of intricacies, I really think it creates a great sandbox in which players can start, because they necessarily, well, they might start with a starting quest, one of these 2, one of them is on the trail of a killer, I believe, and the other is hunting down chewingas, both of which are really fun. The trail of the killer is very, very tough from a combat perspective, but personally, I really like that. I think that this could be a great adventure for kind of veteran PCs who are maybe more in need of some strategy early on to really challenge them at low levels. Then Chewinga one is just a fun mystery. I don't think there's really any combat involved at all, but I still really like it. And from there, you can delve into these 10 towns quests. They can travel from town to town, completing them, leveling as they go. It's a pretty impressive feat that all of these towns feel distinct from one another. They all share the trait of their impressive environment, which is cold and plagued by environmental disaster for the past 2 years. However, they all feel distinct from one another. They have different kind of trade specialities. One might specialize in defense, another in shipwriting, another in creating mead. I think that's a very important thing to specialize in when you're creating a sandbox open world for players. Locations should feel distinct regardless of any similarities that might be present within them. Particularly, these similarities can even lead to locations feeling more unique in that how a civilization has adapted to their climate could really tell a lot about their society or how it works. I also think the notes provided here are great. I think they're a pretty good middle ground between having too much information and too little. I think that there's very much enough that if you were to just run by the book, you would not create anything other than this. You would do completely fine. But if you are an experienced DM and you want to kind of elaborate more and think about ways you could expand the world, there's absolutely room to do so. And there's a ton of great story hooks and ideas that aren't quite fully developed there, but that are just begging to be kind of taken as a DM and just run with. I really like that in a book, and I think this book does it especially well. Further elaborating on the towns, there's a system of ratings called snowflakes here, which I also really like, because it allows you to kind of, at a glance, just get a feel for a town. There are 3 distinct kind of areas that can be ranked by snowflakes, these being, I believe, friendliness, services, and comfort. Apologies, I need to read those from the book themselves to make sure I wasn't messing them up. But I really like those. I think they're great in terms of encompassing what a town can bring to the table at a glance. I think that friendliness is quite important, especially in a frigid land like this, because I can see people very much wanting to open their warm homes to others or closing themselves off and just protecting themselves from the cold. Services are also quite important. Some of these cities are giant and have large kind of buildings and different shops and whatever around. Others might be fairly barren and just kind of ramshackle and wouldn't really have anything. And comfort also kind of goes along with that and allows the kind of quality of life to really come into the fold there as well. I think it's great. And in that same section at the beginning of the chapter, where they kind of detail these ratings, they have a lot of details on how to travel between the towns. They have travel time between each. They have different methods of travel. They have rules for extreme wilderness, extreme cold in the wilderness as well, which is quite interesting. And furthermore, they have random encounter tables for the 10 towns and the area between, which I really like. I think that's great to see, and I think it's great to allow for random roleplay or combat encounters in a sandbox, because otherwise it doesn't really have the same feel to it. The part of what I like in a sandbox is like the feeling of like being in an RPG video game and like running around and having random encounters. Like you're running around in tall grass in Pokemon, as you can see Torterra back there. But it's just something that I really enjoy, probably because of my history of playing video games. But I think that's really great in a book, and I would advise DMs doing the same, be it either finding random encounter tables online from a book or coming up with your own. I've had rewarding experiences with all three, and I think it's really dependent on what you want to do and how much time you have to put into it. Also, at the start of the book, there are 2 tables that I really enjoy. The first of which is a list of the 10 towns' quests. Each town has 1 quest, leading for a total of 10. I wonder how many times I'm going to say 10 in this video. But I think they're also listed in a really interesting way. I think they're listed pretty much in order of difficulty, at least in terms of how I'm reading these so far. And I think that's important to realize as you're kind of going through this as a DM. Furthermore, I think that each of these quests is super unique, and I like them a lot. I think they really lend a lot of flavor to their various locations. There's one where you're hunting down this sentient moose that started killing people. There's one where you're investigating a Loch Ness Monster type thing. There's one where you're trying to get back a cart of stolen mead, very kind of Lost Mine of Phandelver-esque. Really, anything that your players could want, there's really one of everything here, that I really like that variety. Leading into that, there's also a rumors table. I think it's great to allow players to come into the game with some information. If I were to run this, I would probably give each player 1 rumor to start out. They'd have knowledge of a quest and maybe a backstory tied to it. I think that would make it really interesting, and I think it would allow players to have more agency themselves in deciding what quests. I think that as a DM, I would definitely give them one of the 2 starting quests to begin, but now that they're in 10 towns, I'm probably level 2, they're able to start kind of bouncing between these locales and figuring out what quests they want to do, in what order, and why they want to do them. And I really think it's great to give players the agency over what they want to engage with. I think that's really, really fun to do, both for the DM and the players, because it really helps you, as a DM, get to know your players, which is really, really important. I think that knowing your players' tendencies and what they want to do is really a key to being able to run good D&D for them. I just think the way the book deals with leveling is really good. I think there's not really any specific quests you need to do to level up, save for the entry-level level 1 quest. You're able to just essentially level up by doing a certain number of these tasks, or by just getting a certain number of experience from each, particularly due to the challenging encounters in each of them. And I really like that it has that kind of freedom and encourages them to explore this area, really get to know it, especially in an adventure like this, where the whole thing is saving this area. It's important to get invested in 10 towns and in Icewind Dale in order to really care about saving it from Auril, from the Frostmaiden. And I think it's great to have that build up in the early game in order to lead to a more satisfying climax. Another small thing I like here is the outcomes that come out of certain quests. I think that it's great to have those there for new DMs who don't really know necessarily how to extrapolate yet. I think it's great to have those guidelines in order to guide potentially elements of the story, where things might be going after the quest is over for some of these. Particularly, I really like the Dark Alliance outcome from the, which quest is this? I believe it's Bryn Shander quest. I apologize. There's still a lot of city names, and it can be difficult to keep them all straight, but I am really enjoying reading these. I also think it ties into the main quest really well in a certain number of these side quests, essentially. One of them deals with this kind of group of Duragar, one of whom is related to a very important character in the story later on, who I won't spoil. And I think it's great to have those things set up, and it makes your world feel a lot more lived in, to have those lingering connections exist beforehand and have your players kind of make connections on their own, figure things out that they're connected, essentially, and really create agency for them and give them control of their adventure. So there are 2 main things I take out of this book when figuring out how to build a better sandbox in D&D. Firstly, I think it's important to have a number of unique locations that have similarities and things that are distinct from other locations in your world. I don't think you need to spend too much time delving into any of these. I think that having a rating system like this book does with the snowflakes is a great idea. I think just having some idea of the town's kind of trade and maybe political system, and maybe a few kind of social things as well, could just be enough to figure it out, especially if you know roughly where your players are going to end up going. I also think it's important to figure out how you're going to mesh these locations together, what travel looks like and what complications might arise from that. Because there's not really any point of traveling if there's no possibility of any complication arising. I think that's really fun. The main thing that I think of in that case is like Game of Thrones, the show. It was one of my favorite shows when it was running, but in the early seasons, the good seasons, you focused a lot on travel and what could go wrong there, and it felt like there was really a living, breathing world in that place. It felt like because you had to travel from point A to point B, and it might take quite a while, there really was consequences and there are stakes to everything. Whereas in the later seasons, season 7 and 8, people are just teleporting all over the place, and it's not really worth anything. It's not really invested in anything. It's just trying to conclude the story and make as much money as possible for HBO. But anyway, I could talk about that for hours, but I won't. Second thing about sandboxing is giving players options. I think it's great to have a variety of quests, and really seeing what players are going to pick from is the key there. Seeing what players want to engage with and tailoring the adventure from there. If you find that your group is mostly interested in like mysteries and not necessarily as much in combat, you could find them a variety of mystery type encounters and kind of tailor them together into a winding path that leads to an actual story. If your players really want to get strategic combat, you can do that. If people are really interested in role play, you can do that. And it's all down to essentially getting to know the group in the early stages. This is what session 0 is good for, and I think that going beyond session 0, in session 1 and session 2, and seeing what people do in character can also really aid in doing this. So that was a video on Icewind Dale as a sandbox. What did you think? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, like I said at the beginning. I'm really trying to grow the channel, and I'd really appreciate it if you did. I really enjoy making this content, and I'd love to make more like it. So just let me know what kind of stuff you'd like to see me do in the future. If you want, my links are in the description. I make stuff on DM skills, like subclasses, spells, items, all that. And my Twitter is also linked there, where I post a lot more often than I post on here. So check both those out. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a good day. See ya.